Hi again, this is Dr. Brent Kelly, and we are in section 7. There's just a few things that I want to go over concerning various issues in ethics, and then of course we need to talk about our writing assignment. Now, as we've already seen, there are foundations, there are grounds, there are bases for the ways one can make ethical decisions. Some are clearly better than others. Many people fall back on simple pragmatism. That is, they ask, does it work for me? There's also egoism, where benefiting self is the basis for decision making. In one sense, all decisions are self-based. One may reject my need in order to do an altruistic or a very noble act that brings me harm but helps others, or it may be that my choices are based on what I will get from my decision. Either way, I make a choice that affects me. And of course, in that way, it affects other people also. There are also other ways of looking at this, but I think that you understand my point. Now, we've already looked at what happens when we use a community or a social group for decision making through deontology. We've also looked at modernity and post-modernity. Each of these have benefits and weaknesses. A lawyer that I recently spoke to commented that she wanted to see scientific evidence. Now, if you remember your high school, scientific evidence is based upon a hypothesis that is proven within a laboratory. It's repeatable in that laboratory, and that's the scientific method. I mentioned to my friend that there are many ways of proving things that are not scientific. As a matter of fact, as a lawyer, she does that all the time. In spite of what you may have seen on TV, there is other evidence other than scientific, and we use that in law. We wind up having the preponderance of evidence taken from testimonies and from other bits of information that help us to understand what is true beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, since this is a course on theological ethics, I wanted to review some theological ideas when it comes to making decisions. One source is a rather unique document called the Didache, the Didache, or the Writings of the 12. These were probably guidelines taken from the apostles, but were written down by godly people somewhere in the early 2nd century AD. There are 3 aspects of this. The first was the way of life. The second is the love of neighbor. And finally, the way of death. Regarding the way of life in the Didache, it says, first, you shall love God who made you. Secondly, your neighbor as yourself. And whatever you would not like done to you, do not do to another. The love of neighbor provides specific guidelines and prohibitions, such as this, and I quote, "My child, do not be an observer of omens, for this leads to idolatry, or engage in witchcraft, astrology, or ritual ablutions. Do not even desire to see these things or hear them, for from all these idolatry is born." End of quote. Now, the way of death discusses guidelines and prohibitions for significant issues such as murder, adultery, pride, sexual immorality, theft, hypocrisy, lack of the fear of God, injustice, and things of these natures. Now, later on, there was a letter to the church at Corinth written by St. Clement, and he emphasized the need for humility, gratitude, and a creation ethic. Other Christians have emphasized the glory of God. Now, Augustine, he talked about making decisions as citizens of God's heavenly city rather than on the city of man, which is always at war or conflict with God. Bernard of Clairvaux, he said that the love of God should be the central aspect in all of our decision making. One of the most significant theological figures is Martin Luther. Luther talked at length about ethics in his commentary and his sermons on the 10 Commandments. He saw obedience to these commands as a template for making decisions in the rather complex world that he and the other early Protestant church found themselves in, and that was around the 16th century in Europe. There have been many other writers who have emphasized certain key components of Christian theology as the ground for Christian decision making, such as the resurrection and others. We must remember that the type of decision making we're talking about is more than simply deciding what the benefits and liabilities are in any given decision. Rather, we are talking about decision making with a moral framework that will help us decide challenging issues. And with that being said, we come to the second part of this lecture, writing that 8-page ethical paper. Now the assignment is this. Your assignment will be chosen independently by each participant. That's you, the student. This means that you have the opportunity to choose what ethical issues you are interested in. At this point in the class, that should be pretty exciting, and you should have begun to think about some ethical issues that face our culture. For example, topics of a good paper, you can look at a book called An Ethical Compass, Coming of Age in the 21st Century, edited by Elie Wiesel. This book compiles a series of essays by undergraduate students who have submitted their work to a nationally recognized competition. The essays exemplify what our college is looking for in an ethics writing assignment in both quality and substance. Some of the topics in this book are racism, abortion, limited medical resources and allocation, responses to refugees, sexism, classism, education, HIV/AIDS, First Amendment, the industrial prison system, and others. Now, the narrower the topic, the better. A crisp and succinct topic will make writing an 8-page paper a lot easier. Now, what follows should be obvious. In this paper, you can use APA, MLA, Turabian, Chicago, or SBL writing styles. Most colleges use APA or Turabian. It does not matter. I've taught courses on all of these. So please, you'll want to take time to check out these writing styles and to do them properly. All are acceptable forms, of course, though religious study majors should probably use Turabian or SBL. One of the best places to find quick references for Turabian, Chicago, APA, and MLA is the Purdue Online Writing Lab. Now, if you look at the written lecture, it'll actually have the website there, or you can simply type into a search engine Purdue Online Writing Lab. Now remember, this paper needs to be Times New Roman 12-point font, double spaced, 1-inch margins. If you pad your paper by shrinking the margins or lengthening the spaces or using a different font, you'll lose points. Make sure that there's a works cited or bibliography page. This is also required. And this should be a separate page at the end. So your works cited and your bibliography are a separate page after the text. Do not use endnotes. For help on how to create a works cited or bibliography, you can see the library staff, or on that Purdue OWL website that I mentioned, they actually have an example of a paper and what it should look like. Now, whatever you do, do not use Wikipedia. It is an untrustworthy source of information. And although I'm sure you don't need to be reminded, I would be a poor instructor if I did not remind you that your paper needs a cover page, an introduction with a thesis. A thesis is a statement about the central theme in your paper. Your paragraphs need to relate to your thesis, and papers need a logical flow. There needs to be a separate and distinct conclusion where the thesis is restated and you show how you've proven your thesis in that conclusion. If you have any questions or you cannot find help at the school library, contact me at your convenience. Finally, if you struggle with identifying an ethical topic for your paper, contact me before you submit your idea. All right. This is Dr. Brent Kelly. If you have any questions, I'm at your disposal. You have a good week. Again, this is Section 7, and we will see you next time.